Hi, everyone. Today we're telling the story of a man who didn't raise his voice, didn't pound a desk, didn't storm out, but still brought an entire courthouse to a standstill, all because of a medal and the quiet strength to keep wearing it. This could happen to anyone, even you. So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Also comment below where you're watching from and what time it is. Now let me tell you what happened in Courtroom 3C of the Fulton County Courthouse and how one silent act of dignity changed everything. Leonard Hayes wasn't the kind of man who sought attention. At 64, he carried himself with the calm discipline of a man who had already lived through the noise. 26 years in the Army had etched quiet resilience into his bones. These days, Leonard worked for Atlanta's Parks Infrastructure Department, poring over maintenance contracts, vendor records, and paper trails that most people ignored. For him, it wasn't just paperwork, it was a continuation of service, just with a different kind of uniform. That morning in early spring, Leonard stepped into Courtroom 3C dressed in a tailored dark navy suit. The same pair of desert boots from his last tour outside Kandahar were polished to a high shine, and just above his heart, pinned with care, was his bronze star. He hadn't worn it for flair. He'd worn it for memory, for the ones who didn't come home. He was there as a key witness in the corruption trial of Councilman Victor Langston, a man who had long championed himself as a voice for urban renewal. But Leonard's quiet inspections had uncovered a very different truth. Ghost contractors, forged invoices, funds diverted from parks meant to serve working-class families. His meticulous records and testimony could unravel the whole scheme. When the bailiff called his name, the courtroom wasn't silent, but it held that tense stillness that fills a space when something important is about to happen. Leonard rose calm and measured and made his way to the stand. Jurors glanced up. A few members of the gallery noticed the medal. One man near the back, a Vietnam vet, by the look of his faded cap, nodded slowly when Leonard passed. Leonard raised his right hand to take the oath, but before he could even begin, Judge Malcolm Barrett, an older man known for strict courtroom decorum, spoke up. "Mr. Hayes," he said, adjusting his glasses and peering down from the bench, "I need you to remove that medal before we proceed." At first, Leonard thought he'd misheard. "Excuse me, Your Honor. The courtroom isn't the place for personal decorations," Judge Barrett said, his voice clipped. "Please remove the medal or I'll consider you non-compliant." A hush fell over the room, not loud gasps, but a tightening of the air. The prosecutor's mouth parted in surprise. The defense attorney leaned back, expression unreadable. Leonard slowly lowered his hand and folded both in front of him. "With respect, sir," he said calmly, "that medal's not a decoration. It's a part of who I am." The judge leaned forward slightly. "This is a court of law, not a parade ground. I won't ask again." Leonard's voice didn't rise. "I didn't wear it for attention. I wore it because it tells a truth I've lived with every day for over 4 decades. I'm here to testify with honesty, and I'd like to do it as myself completely." A beat of silence. Then Judge Barrett's voice came again, colder now. "Bailiff, escort Mr. Hayes from the courtroom. We're taking a short recess." Whispers stirred. A woman near the back turned to her neighbor and muttered, "He's serious." A reporter peeked in from the hallway, her phone already raised. Leonard didn't resist. He didn't argue. He simply turned back straight and walked out, medal still pinned to his chest. They didn't place him in a holding cell, just a side hallway with a ticking wall clock and a wooden bench. His attorney, Camille Warren, paced the floor beside him, her heels tapping a steady beat. "I've been practicing law for 15 years, she muttered, "and I've never seen a judge try to police a Bronze Star." Leonard didn't respond right away. His mind had slipped somewhere else, to a sun-baked stretch of road outside Kandahar, the sound of radio static, the memory of a friend who never made it past that checkpoint. "I don't wear it to make a statement," he said at last. "Some folks carry loss in photos. I carry it right here." Camille exhaled and sat beside him. "He's trying to rattle you, or maybe worse, undermine your credibility. If he excludes your testimony on a technicality, then they'll have to find someone else with the truth I've got," Leonard said simply. "But I'm not going back in there without it." And outside that hallway, the story had already begun to spread. By the time Leonard and Camille stepped out of that quiet hallway, the courthouse had started to shift. What had begun as a tense but routine corruption case had turned into something else entirely, a moment, a crack in the system, a question too sharp to ignore. Why was a decorated veteran being silenced over a medal? Camille checked her phone. It's already hit the local feeds, she murmured. Channel 5 is outside. And someone posted a clip of the judge dismissing you. It's making rounds on social media. Leonard raised an eyebrow. That fast? She nodded. That loud? Outside the courthouse, a few veterans, small, had already gathered, just 2 or 3 at first, wearing ball caps stitched with the names of wars the city preferred to forget. One of them carried a folding chair. Another brought a thermos of coffee. By noon, there were 7. By 3 p.m., 15. No chanting, no signs, just presence. Back in the courtroom, Judge Barrett reconvened proceedings without Leonard's testimony. The prosecutor raised an objection asking for reconsideration. Camille stood and repeated her motion, respectfully requesting that Leonard be allowed to testify with the medal, noting its non-political nature and symbolic importance. The judge shut it down again, calling the medal a visual distraction. That phrase, those 2 words, became the headline that evening. Visual distraction, judge orders veteran to remove Bronze Star. Veterans organizations responded quickly. The Georgia chapter of the American Legion issued a public statement of support. Veterans should not be made to hide the evidence of their service, especially not in a courtroom seeking truth. And then came the audio. A recording leaked anonymously to an independent news blog captured Judge Barrett in a side conversation just before the hearing. His voice was unmistakable. He's going to come in here puffed up with that chest medal. I'll shut him down. That thing's not coming into my courtroom. The blowback was immediate and severe. National outlets picked up the leak. Talk radio buzzed. Daytime shows debated legal ethics. By morning, Leonard's name was trending across multiple states. Still, Leonard stayed quiet. No interviews. No press conferences. When Camille asked if he wanted to make a statement, he shook his head. I'm not interested in being a headline. I just want the truth in that courtroom. The judge, however, was quickly becoming the story. Old cases began to resurface. In 2017, he'd presided over a case involving another veteran, one who wore a small service pin on his lapel. Barrett made him remove it before taking the stand. No one noticed back then. But now people were looking closely. The courthouse started feeling different. Security grew tighter. Staff moved more carefully. Camille received a quiet word from a clerk. This isn't going away. Folks are talking. And still, Leonard didn't budge. I didn't come here to start a movement, he said as they sat in her car one evening. But maybe the movement was already there. Maybe it just needed a crack to come through. That weekend, the front steps of the courthouse were filled, not with angry crowds, but with citizens, veterans, students, teachers, people who had never worn a uniform but felt the disrespect echo in their own bones. One woman, an Army widow, held up a sign that read, "His medal honors my husband. Let him speak." Camille brought Leonard the headlines. He read them all slowly. One said, "Dignity denied Fulton County Court, sparks outrage." Another simply read the medal they tried to mute. He folded them and slid them into a folder marked, "Case Materials." "This isn't about me," he said quietly. "It's about what we pretend doesn't matter." By Monday morning, things reached a boil. 6 formal complaints had been filed with the Georgia Judicial Review Board. Judge Barrett's office issued a terse statement, "We are reviewing courtroom protocol and decorum guidelines." No further comment, but the real blow came from inside the system. A former clerk of the judge stepped forward anonymously and gave an interview to a legal podcast. She described a pattern subtle but consistent: disdain toward veterans, cold responses to accommodations, a habit of asserting control in ways that push certain people out of the courtroom, not because of what they said, but because of who they were. And that's when the calls for resignation began. Public officials, legal advocates, and veteran organizations flooded the Judicial Review Board with letters, petitions, and formal requests. Camille was contacted by the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. "We're watching this closely," they said. "We may get involved." When she told Leonard, he sat back in his kitchen chair, stared out the window, and took a long breath. "All I did," he said, "was wear the truth on my chest." That night he walked outside and sat on his porch watching the street lamps flicker on. Across the way, a young man passed by walking his dog. He looked up, hesitated, then called out, "Sir, I saw you on the news." "Thank you." Leonard just nodded, no words, just a hand raised in quiet acknowledgement. And in the morning, another silence would fall, but this time it would belong to the judge. The following morning, before the courthouse even opened, something unusual happened. Judge Malcolm Barrett didn't show up. No warning, no explanation. Just an email from his office, timestamped 6:43 a.m. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Judge Barrett will not be presiding over Courtroom 3C today. All hearings under his docket are postponed or reassigned. No further comment. That single message rippled across the entire Fulton County legal system like a dropped match in dry grass. Camille stared at her phone when it came through. Then she looked at Leonard and said, "He's hiding." Leonard, sitting at his kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of black coffee, nodded slowly. He's waiting for the noise to pass. But the noise wasn't passing, it was growing. Overnight, major outlets had picked up on the anonymous podcast interview with Barrett's former clerk. CNN and MSNBC were now running full segments tracing the judge's history. More stories came out. One involved a disabled Marine who had asked to remain seated during testimony due to chronic pain from combat injuries. Barrett denied the request. Another case involved a woman who wore her husband's military dog tag around her neck during a wrongful death suit. Barrett made her tuck it under her blouse. One clip stood out in every segment, the audio leak of Barrett saying, "I'll shut him down." That line played again and again, his voice cold, indifferent, dripping with control. Camille was contacted by a federal ethics investigator named Marion Easton. She asked for access to court transcripts, complaint records, and any documented interactions with Judge Barrett. The DOJ was now officially reviewing the case as a potential civil rights violation. By midweek, even Councilman Victor Langston, the man whose trial Leonard had been set to testify, issued a statement through his lawyer. It was short but devastating. The judge's personal biases have become an unnecessary distraction from the legal process. We request a fair courtroom without controversy. Leonard read the statement twice. "Even the man on trial wants him gone," he said quietly. Outside the courthouse, the steps were filled again. Not with loud chants, but with more people. More signs. One read, "Truth has no dress code." Another, "He earned it. He wears it." Reporters buzzed like flies around the building. A few of them staked out Leonard's block. Some knocked. Others left business cards in his mailbox. Camille started screening all communication, telling him, "We only respond to what matters. The rest is just noise." But then came the email that stopped her cold. It was a leaked PDF. No message, no name. Just a subject line, "You need to read this before they seal it." Inside the attachment were 43 pages of raw courtroom transcript, unofficial but clearly genuine. And on page 7, just before Leonard was to testify, was a conversation between Judge Barrett and two members of his staff. "He's going to come in with his chest puffed out and expect everyone to bow," the judge had said. "That damn medal better stay in his drawer. I don't care what he's done. This is my room." Camille printed it out and drove straight to Leonard's house. She placed the pages in front of him. He read them silently, line by line, until he reached that sentence, "I'll put him in check." He placed the last page on the table and slid it away. "He said it out loud," Leonard murmured. Camille looked at him. "That's enough to sink a career." Leonard didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just looked out the window and said, "I didn't ask for that, but maybe it's overdue." Within hours, the transcript had gone viral. News stations aired it in full. Legal experts didn't mince words. One said, "This is no longer about courtroom policy. This is about intimidation, suppression, misuse of authority." And then came the final shift. Judge Myra Latson, a respected figure from Macon with a long record of integrity, went on public radio and said plainly, "Judges are not kings. Their job is to hold space for justice, not wield their ego as a gavel." That quote was shared over 1 million times in one day. The Georgia Judicial Review Board broke its silence next. In a rare midweek bulletin, they posted, "We are reviewing all transcripts, personnel, interviews, and audio related to recent events in Courtroom 3C. Disciplinary actions have not been ruled out." And then finally, Judge Barrett resigned. No press conference, no apology, just a single-sentence resignation letter filed at 7:59 a.m. on a Monday. Effective immediately, "I hereby resign from my position as presiding judge of Courtroom 3C." Camille got the news alert first. She called Leonard and didn't even say hello. "He's gone," she said. "It's done." Leonard didn't respond right away. Then he exhaled and said, That's something I didn't think I'd hear. But even then, he didn't celebrate. He didn't post online. He didn't grant interviews. He just sat on his porch that night watching the neighborhood dogs bark at each other from across the street and let the stillness soak in. Because what came next wasn't about punishment. It was about truth finally getting a seat in that courtroom. It was a Thursday morning when Leonard Hayes returned to Courtroom 3C, not as a symbol, not as a headline, but simply as a witness. The air inside the courthouse felt different now. Not quieter exactly, but steadier. As if the very walls had stopped bracing against something and finally begun to listen. A new name adorned the docket, Judge Dolores Chambers. She was known in legal circles for being fair, firm, and utterly immune to theatrics. Where Judge Barrett had ruled like a man guarding a throne, Judge Chambers ruled like a woman holding a scale. Leonard stepped through the doors wearing the same navy suit as before. His boots were just as polished, his spine just as straight, and pinned to his chest, unflinching and visible, was not one medal but two, his Bronze Star and the Army Commendation Ribbon he'd received in 2001 after a convoy mission in Iraq saved the lives of 4 civilians. No one stopped him this time. No one raised an eyebrow, and as he walked down the aisle, more than one head bowed, not in judgment, but in quiet recognition. The gallery was packed. Veterans in jackets, students with notepads, a mother with a toddler bouncing gently in her lap. Among them was a man holding a folded flag. Leonard saw him, nodded once, and continued forward. Camille met him at the witness stand. She didn't say anything, just handed him a clean copy of his records and gave a look that said, "You're exactly where you belong." Judge Chambers took the bench at 9:08 a.m. sharp. She glanced over the gallery, then toward Leonard. "Mr. Hayes," she said with a calm, even tone, "this court welcomes your full testimony. And thank you for your service. No debate, no conditions." Leonard nodded once, took the oath, and began. He didn't speak with fire. He didn't try to stir the room. He just told the truth. He detailed how after his retirement from the Army, he took a job auditing vendor contracts for the Atlanta Parks Infrastructure Department. How his job was supposed to be routine, verifying that playground upgrades, trail maintenance, and facility repairs were being properly executed, but how slowly things started to look off. He described the first red flag, a splash pad for children that was supposedly installed at Fairwood Park. But when he went to check, the ground was bare. No equipment, no plumbing, nothing but a dirt patch and a rusted hose bib. Yet the invoice had been paid. $46,000. Signed, approved. Leonard cross-referenced the vendor. Then 2 more. All tied back to Councilman Victor Langston's office. All traced to names that didn't exist in the state's business registry. He showed how the same handwriting appeared on different approval forms under different names. How one address listed for a contractor was actually an empty lot next to a pawn shop. He testified with the precision of a man who spent decades logging mission reports. Every date, every number, every discrepancy. Camille handed him Exhibit B, 3 years' worth of equipment purchase orders, many of which had no corresponding work logs. Leonard continued, this wasn't just about missing money. It was about trust. These parks were supposed to be safe spaces for families, for children, for people who don't have much but deserve something clean, something safe. And instead, someone saw a chance to skim off the top. The courtroom stayed completely still. Councilman Langston sat at the defense table, eyes low, fingers tapping a rhythm against his thigh. He didn't look up once. Camilla asked one final question. "Mr. Hayes, why did you choose to come forward?" Leonard paused, then looked at the jury, and then the gallery. "My wife used to organize food drives at those parks," he said. "She passed a few years ago, but I remember how proud she was when they got new picnic tables installed. She believed in public spaces, in public good. I couldn't stay quiet knowing someone was robbing the next generation of what they hadn't even received yet." He exhaled softly. "So I spoke up." Judge Chambers thanked him, then called a recess. Leonard stepped down from the stand, gathered his papers, and walked back through the courtroom, past rows of people who this time didn't just nod. They stood, not all at once, not as protest, but as acknowledgement. He didn't linger. He didn't wave. He just left the same way he entered, steady, quiet, complete. That afternoon, Leonard stopped by Fairwood Park. The splash pad had finally been installed, functional, colorful, full of kids racing through water jets and laughing in the sunlight. He sat on one of the new benches, now real, now solid, the kind made to last. He watched for a while, said nothing, thought of his wife, thought of the ones who never came home. And in that moment, as the water danced and children squealed with joy, something settled deep inside him. Not pride, not vindication, just peace. The trial resumed the next morning. This time it moved with a rhythm closer to what justice should sound like. No raised voices, no battles over decorum, just evidence, questions, and clarity. The weight of everything that had happened, the judge's fall, the nation's attention, the groundswell of support, didn't disappear, but it no longer distorted the proceedings. It gave them shape. It gave them purpose. Camille wrapped up her case in 2 days. The prosecution rested. The defense made their arguments, but even their own witness list seemed rattled, subdued. Councilman Victor Langston never took the stand. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found him guilty on all major counts: conspiracy to defraud the city, misuse of public funds, and tampering with government documents. He was led from the courtroom in silence, cuffed, his future now narrowed by the very system he once manipulated. But the story didn't end with the verdict. That weekend, Leonard received an invitation, just a plain envelope dropped through his mail slot. It was from Monroe High School, a public school on the south side of Atlanta. Inside was a handwritten letter from a social studies teacher named Ms. Ray. She explained that her students had been following the case closely and asked if Leonard would consider coming to speak at their upcoming civic leadership assembly. He hesitated. "I'm not really the speaking type," he told Camille over the phone. "You didn't ask to be heard the first time," she said gently. "But they're listening now, and they want to know what strength looks like," so he went. He wore jeans, a clean button-down shirt, and no medals. No fanfare, just himself. As he stepped into the gymnasium, the chatter quieted instantly. Rows of students turned in their metal chairs to face him. He walked to the center, held the mic for a second, then spoke. "I wasn't trying to start anything," he said. "I didn't walk into that courtroom to make a point. I walked in to tell the truth. That's all." He paused. Let the silence hold for a beat. "But some people don't like when the truth wears boots, or medals, or skin that doesn't shrink when someone in power pushes against it." A student in the back raised his hand, maybe 15 years old, tall and soft-spoken. "Were you afraid they wouldn't let you speak?" Leonard looked at him and answered quietly, "I wasn't afraid of being silenced. I was afraid of silencing myself. Because if I take off the part of me that tells the truth just to be heard, then what good are the words that follow?" That moment held. Somewhere in the front row, a girl whispered, "That's real." Afterward, the students lined up to shake his hand. Some wanted to ask questions. Others just wanted to say thank you. One young woman handed him a small pin from her grandfather's service uniform. "He would have stood too," she said. Leonard stayed until the room emptied. No cameras, no statements, just a room full of kids who now saw something bigger than a medal. Back at home, Camille stopped by that evening with 2 envelopes. One was from the city council, a formal resolution honoring Leonard Hayes for extraordinary service to the truth and to the people of Atlanta. The other was from the Department of Justice, confirming that a formal investigation had been launched into courtroom discrimination and judicial conduct, citing Leonard's experience as the catalyst. He read both quietly, then tucked them into a drawer with the court transcripts, case records, and every document that told the story behind what had happened. He didn't frame anything, didn't post it online, but he kept it, just like he kept the boots. That night he sat on the porch again. The street was calm. A light breeze rustled the trees. Down the block someone was grilling. A child laughed. A dog barked. And Leonard just sat there, not needing applause, not seeking recognition, just being exactly who he was. Still, whole, unmoved. Because dignity doesn't ask for attention. It simply doesn't step aside when attention tries to rewrite what's right. And in the quiet, he smiled. Sometimes the most powerful resistance doesn't come in the form of yelling, marching, or slamming a fist on the table. Sometimes it looks like a quiet man in his 60s standing in a courtroom, simply refusing to remove a part of himself. Not to make a statement, not to provoke, but because truth shouldn't have to bend just to fit in. Leonard Hayes reminded us of something we too often forget in our rush for noise and reaction, that courage can be calm, that conviction can wear a suit, in scuffed boots and still shake the very floor beneath those who abuse their power. His story is more than a legal victory. It's a lesson in what it means to stand for something without becoming bitter, to confront injustice, without becoming loud, to live with honor, not just in medals or records, but in choices. Small, stubborn, unshakable choices. So wherever you are, whether you're someone who's worn a uniform, someone who's ever been overlooked, or someone just trying to do right in a world that sometimes punishes the quiet ones, remember, Leonard? Remember that you don't have to change who you are to be heard. You just have to refuse to be moved when the truth is on your side. And maybe, just maybe, that's what starts to move everything else.